how do we know it's just anxiety and not real? What's your answer to that, Doc?
So the two most common themes of OCD, aside from the classic, spike themes, but the more pervasive or ubiquitous. I learned a new word today.
See, I'm teaching you, Doc.
I mean, I'm just I'm feeding out of your hands. Is how do I know this is OCD and not a legitimate threat? And number two is this ever going to go away? A very, very common concern for almost all of my patients, because it has such an enduring, and most of the time patients who enter therapy, it's been going on for a significant period of time. And it certainly seems like it's now permanently there. And unfortunately, a lot of ignorant information on the internet suggests that, OCD is a lifelong, disorder, which I think that the reason that lie is so pervasive is because there's such a tremendous amount of ignorance in the treatment of OCD. And so if you don't get appropriate treatment for it, sure, it's going to hang out for a long time. But to go back to the cliffhanger, how do I know the difference between, let's take my favorite, most common topic, which is, how do I know you can't catch AIDS from a doorknob, right? Yeah. How do I know that I'm not going to go home tonight and kill my family? Right. How do I know that I'm not gay? How do I know that I'm dating the appropriate person? How do I know that I'm not actually attracted to inappropriate people? How do I know that I've not just offended God and that I'm now on a one-way ticket to hell? Mm. So the answer to those questions, unfortunately, is that people with OCD are so desperate to rationally lock in that answer because their intelligent brain says to them, if you could just know that this theme is not legitimate, that this is just an illusion of your malfunctioning brain, then that would really facilitate your recovery. Mm. Because, we all sort of seek this idea of, that knowledge gives us answers and answers gives us closure. But right. With CD, there's nothing further from the truth. And unfortunately, the goal of effective treatment with OCD is not to gain an answer about whether or not these topics are legitimate. And
there's that paradox again, right, Doc? Kind of.
Yeah. And it really, frustrates, people who are very intelligent and very rational, which the vast majority of patients that I work with are very intelligent and very rational. And they live life as most intelligent, rational people do, to say, if I know something, if I have an answer, then that will be instrumental in relief seeking. But with OCD, the effort to obtain that answer actually becomes ritualizing. And as you're probably very familiar with, that ritualizing actually is the fuel for OCD. If you give a theme, an OCD theme, relevance, and there's unfortunately many, many ways of achieving that goal, that unhealthy goal, the brain reacts to choosing to give a theme relevance to double downing on the idea that the theme is legitimate. In other words, if you're working so hard to prove that this theme isn't legitimate, that must mean something's wrong. Right. And that must mean you have a problem. And that means you now need to work harder to resolve the problem. And everyone's emotional instinct is, well, I can resolve the problem if I just get the answer that right. I'm not a pedophile. I'm not a violent person. I am dating the right person. I'm not homosexual. You can't catch AIDS from a doorknob, so, or being aware of my swallowing is not a problem, which are just a few of the probably 1,000 different themes of OCD.
There's so many. There's so many. I think I've had multiple, by the way, in my experience. But yeah, the swallowing thing, and you mentioned in part one the patient who had four recurring themes, like saying something racial, the fear of just lashing out and saying something racial, and the fear of harming, and the fear of maybe I drove over somebody. I wonder how much.
Hit and run, false memory OCD. That's three. And remember the fourth? Suicide.
Right. What if I harm myself? Right.
Jumping off the balcony of his
yes
24 apartment building. Right. So, and what I said was that his brain would light up one of the four topics, and as the other topics were not lit up emotionally, he had no concerns for them, which demonstrates once again that the themes of OCD are completely irrelevant. So to answer the first question, tragically, how do I know? Like if a patient comes in and says that they're having thoughts of harming their child, I do not do a screening to find out whether that person is a risk to their child. If a person comes in with suicidal OCD, you're going to be on a cruise ship in the near future, and every time I'm on a cruise ship, my brain tells me to jump off the balcony. If you said, "Oh, Steve, I've got the same association when I'm on a cruise ship, when I'm out on the balcony sipping pina coladas," which I know you Californians are addicted to. So, I would
don't judge us too harshly.
I don't no judgments from Steve. I would not do a suicide assessment with you,
which is what a cognitive psychotherapist would do, correct? Which is the difference between behavioral therapy and psychotherapy, which you said in part one.
That may be where the cognitive therapist would try to, have you prove that you're not really at risk by looking for the evidence or the non-evidence that you're at any risk of self-harm. So, you see, the thing is, with themes of OCD, there is an inherent sort of rejection of the theme and desperation to disprove the theme.
Yeah.
So you coming in saying, hey, I have harmed thoughts toward my family, and I'm really, distressed by those harm thoughts, right away, I'm pretty confident being able to say, oh, this is a classic OCD theme, as opposed to, well, do you have sharp objects in your kitchen that may be used to harm your family? I would.
Were you a bully when you were a kid? Yeah.
Exactly. Did you harm animals as a child? And the more that you try to give a screening to someone with their OCD theme, the more that person's brain is going to find lots of evidence to justify that the theme may be legitimate. So right. The bad news is there is no way to obtain an answer. How do I know this is OCD and not a theme? And what's funny is that a lot of people use the desperation to be diagnosed as OCD as a form of reassurance, because
right.
That people with OCD never act on their thoughts, or OCD themes are never legitimate. So a person will be like, is this OCD? Is this OCD? And they're secretly meaning, is it not legitimate? Is it not legitimate? So even the question, is it OCD, for many people just becomes a reassurance seeking ritual.
Right.
So rather than, attaining the answer, oh, good, I have my OCD trophy. Now I'm safe. I know I can't die from AIDS on a doorknob. I know I'm not going to harm my kids because I have my OCD trophy. What's really critical in treatment success, and this isn't a fun thing to consider, but to take the leap of faith and to say, I'm going to treat it as if it's OCD, while holding in abeyance the uncertainty it may not be. And that's
what a proposition. That's such a scary, for somebody who suffers from this, that's a scary proposition, because essentially what you're saying is you need to take the risk, correct?
That's right. It's what's interesting? It's really not so much you need to think, like to say to someone, you need to take a risk that tonight when you go home, you're going to kill your family.
Wow.
So no one really is willing to take that risk, right?
No,
I
no.
certainly
I
would.
would rather lock myself up in a cage and go to sleep, right?
Exactly. And
I think most people watching, and listening would say the same.
yeah, a lot of people would, like achieve a room in their house and have their spouse put an outer lock on the door to keep them from leaving the room. And so, so rather than, the idea of accepting, the risk, the uncertainty that this may be legitimate, it's really more, I'm going to give my brain permission to share the idea.
And this is kind of, you touched upon this, Doc. So this idea of taking the risk, the leap of faith that it is, this kind of alludes to a lot of stuff that you've talked about in the past, which I have experienced to be 100% true, which is you can't out-logic this. So the therapist who's telling you there's nothing wrong with you, you don't have a past that's dark or violent, you don't have genetics, your mom and dad aren't serial killers or whatever, is simply that same mechanism, correct, Doc, of trying to logify. I just invented a new word. Logify something, and you allude to this in Choice too, barking at the dog. Can you kind of expand upon that, predicated upon people who try to logify this? Because I think a lot of intelligent people out there who are watching and listening think like, I know this is ridiculous. I know this is absurd, but yet.
And they say, I sort of have an awareness. They wish they could know, but their emotional malfunctioning system unplugs the knowing because they all say the same thing. It feels so real.
Right.
Now I hear
100%.
About 12 times a day. It feels so real.
I mean, honestly, Doc, it feels the same as if you're standing 15 feet away in an opening from a wild grizzly bear. So everything in your body is sending that signal, right? Where I'm in imminent danger and I need to flee, right? The amygdala is fight or flight. I need to get the hell out of here because I'm not fighting this thing. It literally, Doc, as somebody who's gone through this, you're lying in bed and you're getting those images and those signals, and the body is reacting in the same exact way as if you're standing in front of a 25-foot tall, 600-pound wild grizzly.
Certainly couldn't agree more. And because it feels so real, that's what becomes the more persuasive mechanism of getting intelligent, rational people to behave in such irrational ways. Right. As I said before, it's like trying to put out a fire when the fire actually doesn't exist in the first place. And that's why people engage in such ludicrous rituals like, driving around their neighborhood looking for bodies that they might have hit on the way to work.
Wow.
Or hiding knives to prevent them from even having the mental association that they might do harm with them. The mechanism of OCD that drives the entire broken, ship is a part of the brain that has no verbal capabilities. So if you have a theme of harming your family, and I say to you, oh, Nez, all the evidence we've gathered in your history says you're not a violent guy. I've given you $10,000 worth of psychological tests, and all the tests say you're a peace-loving guy, right? We're having this great conversation to say your thoughts of harming your family are illegitimate. Well, your amygdala, which is responsible for the distress signal, we can't talk to the amygdala. So all of your testing and all of my reassurance and all of your Steve says I'm not a danger to the family. All of those words are talking to the barking dog, meaning that the amygdala cannot receive any verbal information in any way that alters its tendency to fire. The only thing that can modify the amygdala is the demonstration that the signal is irrelevant.
Right.
And this is a critical mistake that many, many, many therapists make.